Welcome to the deep dive.
It's good to be here.
If you sent us your news stack from, let's say, the last week of November 2025, well, you should probably prepare yourself.
Hmm.
Looking through this material, the world wasn't just spinning. It felt like every critical system we rely on.
Geopolitical,
Huh?
technological.
Right, climatic, even domestic security, all of it was hitting a breaking point and all at the same time.
It's an incredible amount of information to synthesize.
We are diving into a period of maximum
It was
volatility.
a monumental week
Yeah.
and a true challenge to put it all together. You had these unilateral declarations of, closed airspace
Mm.
colliding with massive human displacement from climate disasters. And all of that while the fundamental rules governing things like public health and commercial aviation were really rewritten on the fly.
Literally on the fly in some cases.
Exactly. The sheer volume of these high-stakes, disparate events, it really requires us to do more than just, read the headlines.
And that's our mission today. Our goal is to take this stack, extract the most crucial, the most interconnected dynamics, and deliver them to you as a complete contextualized briefing.
We want to connect the dots.
We're connecting the dots between, for example, a declaration impacting Venezuela's sovereignty and a tiny high-energy particle from the sun temporarily grounding half the world's commercial jets.
Which is an amazing story in itself.
It's incredible.
So we've organized the sources into three major segments, really to bring some structure to all this chaos.
Okay.
First, we're going to tackle geopolitical escalation and security shocks. So that's focusing on unilateral action, conflict, all that.
All right.
Second, we'll dissect global systems under strain. We'll be analyzing the unprecedented stress on both engineered systems, like that aircraft software, and natural systems like monsoons, just supercharged by climate change.
And then the third part.
Finally, we'll look at what we're calling policy earthquakes and new frontiers. So this covers these dramatic policy shifts in health and finance, and it goes right up to, well, some surprising discoveries on Mars.
Okay, let's unpack this. I think we should start right where the geopolitical tension was probably highest: unilateral action, borders, and the air above them.
Let's do it.
So, Venezuela.
Yes, the flashpoint here, the thing that really kicked it all off, was this announcement concerning Venezuela's airspace. On Saturday, November 29th, President Trump declared the airspace above and surrounding Venezuela
Get this.
closed in its entirety.
And he didn't just say to who, he listed them.
He did. He specified airlines, pilots, drug dealers, and human traffickers.
And the medium for this major international declaration,
Truth Social.
of all places, not exactly a formal diplomatic channel.
Not at all. And the mode of delivery is, it's noteworthy, but the substance of it is just staggering.
Right. And this wasn't happening in a vacuum. We really need to frame the context here. What did U.S.-Venezuelan relations look like leading up to this moment?
Well, they were defined by hostility and, frankly, covert action. For years, Washington had been implementing these crippling sanctions.
Right, the economic pressure.
Exactly. And leveling narco-terrorism charges against high-ranking Venezuelan officials. On top of that, they'd significantly ramped up maritime and covert operations in the Caribbean.
Against what they called suspected drug smuggling boats.
Right, boats originating from the Venezuelan coast. Caracas, for its part, well, it sees this whole U.S. policy framework as nothing less than an explicit attempt at regime change.
And they believe it's fueled primarily by an interest in Venezuela's, vast oil reserves.
Precisely. So the geopolitical rhetoric was already at a fever pitch, but this declaration, this social media post, it introduced a completely new level of risk.
Because it lacked any formal technical framework, it caught people, even within the U.S. government, completely off guard.
Exactly. And that is the distinction we have to stress. An official notice to airmen, a NOTAM, or a defined air defense identification zone, an ADIZ.
Those have rules.
They require international coordination. They define precise rules of engagement, technical coordinates. This announcement did none of that.
So it was a massive unilateral political statement.
Issued without any of the necessary technical details or formal notice to international aviation authorities, to carriers. It caught, as you said, many U.S. agencies off guard, too.
And that lack of technical clarity is what created the immediate danger. You saw Reuters and other global news organizations just struggling to interpret the legal weight of it.
Was this an actual enforceable air blockade?
Or was it just a political warning layered on top of the already existing and very serious FAA advisories about security conditions there?
And we should note, Venezuela was already suffering from collapsing connectivity. The country was becoming more and more isolated.
That's a good point.
Just earlier that same week, Following those existing FAA warnings, Caracas had already revoked the operating rights for 6 major international airlines.
So the air links to Europe, to the Americas.
They were already severely curtailed. This new declaration just layered on pure chaos.
The impact was instantaneous, right?
Immediate. It spooked passengers who were already traveling or had plans to travel in the region. It raised serious, immediate questions about flight insurance.
Would your insurance even cover a route that was now perceived as hostile territory?
Exactly. And it instantly fueled speculation among military analysts that the U.S. might be preparing for actual airstrikes.
And maybe even enforcing a naval blockade.
Right, specifically under this expanded banner of anti-drug operations. The term casus belli
An act that justifies war.
was being used widely in commentary by the end of that weekend. It was that serious.
And the international reaction?
It just affirmed the gravity of the move. Caracas, as you'd expect, forcefully rejected it. They called it a colonial threat and a clear violation of their national sovereignty.
But it wasn't just them.
No, and this is maybe more critical. Regional allies of the U.S., including key partners like Colombia, publicly criticized the move as illegal, destabilizing, and disproportionate.
So even allies were pushing back?
Yes. By November 30th, analysts were openly discussing the very high risk of military miscalculation.
A straying aircraft, a misunderstanding.
Exactly. They were warning that if U.S. military forces tried to enforce such a broad and technically undefined closure, the possibility of a direct clash, accidental or intentional, with Venezuelan military assets would just increase dramatically.
So we have a geopolitical declaration delivered over social media that creates immediate, tangible, physical escalation risks.
Yes, the pivot point.
Let's connect this international pressure cooker now to the intense domestic security shocks that were happening at the same time, because they had immediate and really sweeping policy fallout in the U.S.
Yes, let's turn to the tragic events surrounding the D.C. National Guard shooting.
This was on November 26th.
That's right. 2 members of the West Virginia National Guard, Specialist Sarah Beckstrom and Staff Sergeant Andrew Wolf, were ambushed near the White House.
Specifically near the Farragut West metro station.
Yes. Specialist Beckstrom, who was only 20 years old, tragically died from her wounds. And Sergeant Wolf, he remained in critical condition.
The suspect was identified pretty quickly.
Ramanullah Lakanwal, a 29-year-old Afghan national. He had been residing in the U.S. under one of the post-withdrawal resettlement programs.
And he was charged with first-degree murder.
Yes. And this single, very localized, very tragic event instantly exploded into a national political crisis.
Why? I mean, what was the mechanism for that?
It was all because of its political framing. The case was immediately used by President Trump to argue that this shooting was definitive proof of systemic failures.
Specifically in the Biden-era vetting and asylum policies.
Exactly. Now, what's crucial to understand here is that the asylum application process is inherently prolonged. It often spans multiple administrations, as this one did.
But that nuance was lost.
It was. The administration, led by the president, focused on this single case to validate a much broader narrative about failures in border and immigration security.
And the policy response was not subtle. It was immediate and sweeping.
It was. The administration announced a dramatic and largely unprecedented policy shift. They ordered the immediate pausing of all asylum decisions.
All of them.
All of them. And all Afghan visa issuances, pending a brand new comprehensive review of the vetting procedures.
Wow.
And Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, she stepped forward to argue that the suspect was likely radicalized after his arrival in the U.S.
So using the tragedy to defend a broader, more hardline approach to immigration screening and resettlement programs.
That's right. But this move was not without immediate and very strong backlash.
I would imagine not.
Civil liberties groups, humanitarian organizations, they instantly issued these stark warnings against what they termed scapegoating.
Scapegoating Afghan allies who had, in many cases, risked their lives to help U.S. forces.
Yes. And exploiting a single devastating case to justify imposing these sweeping policy changes that would affect thousands of vulnerable people just waiting for resettlement and status review.
So the policy shift itself became a major point of domestic contention.
A huge one. So you have a single, localized security shock triggering this national policy earthquake that affects foreign nationals all over the world.
But that same volatile weekend also saw security failures hitting a different and devastatingly personal part of American life.
That's right. We have to contrast that high-level political security debate with the profound community violence that hit Stockton, California on November 29th.
This was a mass shooting.
At a child's birthday party in a local banquet hall.
Just awful.
The event drew over 100 community members, and it resulted in 4 fatalities. The chilling specific detail here is that 3 of the victims were children.
What were their ages?
Ages 8, 9, and 14.
My goodness.
Alongside a 21-year-old adult. And another 10 to 11 people were wounded.
And what did the investigation say?
Well, the initial investigation suggested it might have been a targeted attack, but by the end of the weekend, the motive was still unclear, and the suspect remained at large.
And a tragedy like that happening at a celebration designed for children, it just immediately reignited and intensified all of those national debates.
Over the easy availability of assault weapons, the efficacy of community policing efforts.
And just the persistent, devastating toll of mass shootings on American families.
Yes, it really drove home the point that security concerns are not just abstract policy issues related to far-off borders or federal districts.
No, they're existential threats that touch the most fundamental aspects of American community life.
Precisely. Now let's pivot from there, back to the active international conflict zones, which saw their own intense escalations at the very same time.
The situation in Gaza and the West Bank deteriorated sharply.
It did. The fragile October 2025 ceasefire completely broke down by November 30th. Israeli military jets were observed targeting sites in southern Gaza.
While at the same time, raids, arrests, and detentions by Israeli forces ramped up significantly in the West Bank.
And the reports coming out indicated a grim reality. Hundreds had reportedly been killed since the truce ended.
With international organizations documenting persistent reports of high civilian casualties?
Yes, and extensive destruction of residential buildings in Gaza. The renewed conflict seemed to quickly return to the high-intensity level we'd seen earlier in the year.
And this leads us directly to a critical and very sensitive accountability question that came out of the West Bank.
The UN Rights Office, the OHCHR.
The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights.
Yes, they issued a very strong statement on November 28th. They decried what they termed an apparent summary execution of 2 Palestinian men by Israeli border police.
And what was that based on?
Their concern was triggered by video footage. It appeared to show the men being shot at close range after they had already been incapacitated.
They were no longer a threat.
That's what the footage seemed to suggest. So the office demanded a prompt, independent, and fully transparent investigation.
And they warned that the actions seen in the video could, if it's confirmed, constitute an extrajudicial execution.
Which is a severe violation of international law.
And at the same time all of this is happening on the ground, the political drama within Israel itself was also intensifying and connected directly to these crises.
Right. On November 30th, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu formally requested a pardon in his own long-running corruption trial.
Which involves charges of what? Bribery, fraud?
Bribery, fraud, and breach of trust, yes.
Yeah.
This is a major test of the rule of law in Israel.
What was his justification?
Netanyahu publicly argued that granting clemency would be in the public interest amid the ongoing national security crises, including the renewed fighting.
So his supporters would say his leadership during the conflict justified closing the legal chapter.
Yes, to allow him to focus entirely on the war effort. Opponents, however, warned vehemently that a pardon would dangerously undermine the independence of the judiciary.
And fuel perceptions of political favoritism and unequal justice.
Especially during a time when national unity is being demanded, it was incredibly controversial.
And simultaneously, we saw escalation further north in Syria.
Yes. Israel launched attacks there in late November that killed at least 13 people, including 2 children.
And this reportedly happened after local militia forces resisted an incursion by Israeli ground forces.
Right. And this activity is part of that broader pattern of cross-border operations designed to target Iranian-linked infrastructure and personnel, which just further intensifies regional volatility.
So the whole region is on a nice edge.
And while the Middle East continued its slide toward high-intensity conflict, we have to briefly acknowledge a significant democratic setback in West Africa.
The Guinea-Bissau coup on November 28th.
Just days after national elections, which is what's so shocking, soldiers seized key government and military installations.
Detained elected officials and formally dissolved parliament. The timing and speed were just breathtaking.
And the international community reacted strongly. The UN condemned the takeover as a grave violation of constitutional order.
And the regional bodies. ECOWAS, the African Union.
They immediately began considering imposing sanctions. And the concerns here go beyond just democracy.
What do you mean?
Well, West Africa has seen this really disturbing trend of military rule resurfacing, and international watchdogs often link this to transnational organized crime.
Specifically, drug trafficking networks.
Exactly. Networks that use these politically unstable nations as transit points.
So let's just recap for a second. In less than 1 week, we've covered a potential air blockade, sweeping immigration policy shifts from a domestic murder, devastating community violence, a truce breakdown in the Middle East, a challenge to Israeli judicial independence, and a coup in West Africa.
It's an almost overwhelming catalog of geopolitical stress.
It really is.
Which brings us perfectly to our next segment, systems under strain. We need to look at how these complex systems, both the ones we engineer and the natural ones, are failing under contemporary stresses, whether they're coming from cosmic radiation or from climate change.
This is where we get into that intersection of technology and cosmic chaos. When we talk about systemic failure, nothing was more shocking that week than the unprecedented safety intervention required for the Airbus A320 fleet.
This is a deep dive into technical risk. The A320 family, so that's the A319, A320, and A321,
The workhorses of global aviation.
the absolute workhorse of global short and medium-haul aviation. There are thousands of these jets worldwide. The core incident actually happened in late October 2025.
That's right. It was a JetBlue A320.
It experienced an uncommanded pitch-down event while it was cruising at high altitude, and it resulted in injuries to passengers and crew.
And the cause, once they traced it, is what makes this a landmark event for anyone studying system resilience.
It wasn't just a traditional mechanical fault. Engineers traced the issue to a recent software update.
An update affecting the aircraft's elevator aileron computers, which control critical flight surfaces.
But the software wasn't the sole culprit. And this is the amazing part.
It was a perfect storm.
Or rather, the perfect bit flip. The software vulnerability combined with an extremely rare event in digital avionics.
The corruption of data due to intense solar radiation.
Exactly. We're talking about high-energy cosmic rays, energetic particles bombarding the atmosphere at cruise altitude, causing a single critical bit of data
A 0 becomes a 1, or vice versa.
to spontaneously flip in the aircraft's memory registers.
A single, tiny, invisible piece of cosmic chaos fundamentally undermining flight control. That is an almost unbelievable vulnerability.
Well, the deeper technical analysis suggests that the new software update introduced some kind of lack of redundancy or maybe a critical timing vulnerability.
Something that allowed this random bit flip to translate directly into a catastrophic control input.
Bypassing the robust safety mechanisms that usually prevent these kinds of single-point failures.
And that's the critical technical takeaway, isn't it? Aircraft are built with triple redundancy precisely to handle hardware failures.
Yes, but this incident exposed a whole new systemic risk. A vulnerability where a common software platform, combined with space weather, could affect thousands of different aircraft at the same time.
And compromise their digital redundancy.
That's right. And this forced the decisive regulatory action in late November. Regulators, primarily EASA in Europe and the FAA in the US.
They ordered airlines globally to apply urgent software fixes.
Or, if that wasn't immediately possible, to revert to a previously certified version of the flight control software before carrying any more passengers.
The sheer scale of that recall effort was historic.
Oh, it was. This mandate affected roughly 6,000 A320 family jets.
Which is nearly half the entire global commercial fleet of that type.
An incredible number. And while many could perform rapid software rollbacks, about 1,000 older aircraft required more time-consuming hardware modifications in addition to the software changes.
So we saw immediate global disruption.
Hundreds of cancellations and delays across major carriers like EasyJet, Air New Zealand, Delta, and Jetstar. I mean, it was chaos.
The Airbus CEO, Guillaume Faury, he publicly apologized.
He did, but experts noted this was arguably the largest single-type safety intervention driven by an external non-mechanical factor in the history of commercial aviation.
So what's the deeper implication for us?
It's clear. Systemic resilience must now explicitly account for space weather phenomena.
As aircraft become more and more software dependent,
They become more vulnerable to these high-altitude energetic particle effects. It forces a significant and very expensive new round of debate among regulators about how certification standards have to evolve to guarantee the integrity of digital control systems when facing cosmic interference.
from technological systems buckling under cosmic stress, let's pivot to natural systems buckling under climatic stress. I'm talking about the absolutely devastating Southeast Asia floods.
The crisis began with Cyclone Ditwa, or Dwa. It formed in the Bay of Bengal, and it was fueled by unusually warm ocean waters.
It slammed into Sri Lanka first and hardest in late November.
It unleashed truly torrential rainfall. In some regions, the rainfall exceeded 300 millimeters in just 24 hours.
And we need to understand Sri Lanka's acute vulnerability here. It wasn't just the intensity of the storm itself.
No, not at all. You had decades of rampant deforestation, coupled with haphazard urban growth that paved over natural drainage areas.
And severely under-resourced local disaster management structures.
It made the island an ecological and infrastructural disaster waiting to happen.
The human toll climbed rapidly and tragically.
By November 30th, the confirmed death toll in Sri Lanka had surged from 56 to over 130.
With estimates of 130 to 170 people still missing.
And the capital, Colombo, was effectively swamped. It cut off vital transport links, power infrastructure, and access to clean water. The magnitude was such that regional powers,
Specifically India.
had to dispatch specialized search and rescue teams to assist the overwhelmed local forces.
But the crisis quickly escalated far beyond Sri Lanka's borders.
Yes. These extreme rains were driven by the same monsoonal pattern, likely intensified by La Niña conditions, and it was battering the entire region at the same time.
So what did the regional tallies look like?
They indicated the combined death toll across Southeast Asia was climbing toward 900 people.
Making it one of the deadliest flood episodes in the area since the 2004 tsunami.
The scale of devastation in Indonesia was particularly chilling. Over 400 confirmed deaths, concentrated on the island of Sumatra.
Where landslides, triggered by the saturated ground, completely wiped out entire villages.
The humanitarian crisis deepened so quickly, nearly 300,000 people were displaced.
And there were heartbreaking reports emerging of desperate residents cut off from aid and supplies.
Resorting to looting for basic necessities like food and bottled water, it just underscores the complete collapse of logistical and security structures in the hardest-hit areas.
And Thailand was also severely impacted.
Over 150 deaths reported there. And crucially, the city of Hat Yai recorded its heaviest rainfall in centuries.
It overwhelmed its modern flood management systems.
Which proves that even relatively better prepared urban centers were no match for the sheer intensity of these downpours.
This brings us to the crucial policy and climate link.
Aid agencies were unanimous in stressing that this disaster is a stark, tangible example of how anthropogenic climate change magnifies existing monsoon hazards.
Especially in regions where poor drainage infrastructure and inadequate land use planning just compound the risks.
Exactly. And experts shifted the focus from immediate post-disaster relief to long-term adaptation.
They argued that wealthier nations must dramatically increase funding dedicated to climate adaptation.
So helping vulnerable nations build resilient infrastructure, restore natural flood defenses like mangrove forests, improve early warning systems.
Rather than just focusing on carbon mitigation or short-term relief, which just treats the symptoms of increasing climatic volatility.
That's the key.
And while Asia faced catastrophic flooding, the U.S. transportation network faced its own, albeit smaller scale, systemic weather stress with the Thanksgiving storm.
A powerful winter storm that slammed the Midwest right around November 29th, coinciding with the busiest travel period of the year.
Key hubs like Chicago were expecting up to a foot of snow, coupled with severe winds.
It immediately turned interstates and airports into gridlock. It effectively disrupted the entire U.S. Thanksgiving travel picture.
Causing hundreds of flight cancellations and major highway incidents across multiple states.
Again, it just underscores the vulnerability of our infrastructure and supply chains during peak demand periods when facing even predictable weather events.
And shifting from environmental strains to domestic economic strains, we have to highlight a major report that week about the persistent, severe housing crisis in the U.S.
The findings were stark and very concerning. Many Americans holding down full-time jobs are still fundamentally unable to afford a secure, stable place to live.
And the conversation moved past just simple inflation and focused on deeper structural factors.
3 major factors were highlighted. First, the chronic limited housing supply, which is exacerbated by restrictive local zoning laws and lengthy approval bottlenecks for new construction.
Especially multifamily units.
Yes. Second, the growing issue of large-scale investor ownership of rental units, where corporations buy up vast blocks of single-family homes, driving up prices.
And limiting accessible inventory for first-time buyers.
And third, the critical factor of wage stagnation. Wages have simply not kept pace with the soaring rent and home values, driven by these other pressures.
It's a crisis of affordability and supply, demonstrating a systemic failure to provide basic stability for the working population.
And finally, under this strain category, we should note that critical infrastructure vulnerability was also hitting fragile states, specifically Iraq,
That's right. A rocket strike hit the Khormor gas field.
which is an absolutely critical piece of energy infrastructure in the semi-autonomous Kurdistan region. This attack was highly effective. It led to widespread power disruptions across the entire region.
And the immediate consequence of that infrastructure failure was social and political volatility.
Reports indicated that following the power loss, a riot broke out in Erbil's Guer area, driven by frustration over the blackouts.
And tragically, this unrest resulted in one person being killed and several others wounded.
It just powerfully illustrates how infrastructure failure, whether it's caused by an attack or by the climate, quickly translates into profound social and political instability.
We've seen the systems break: the plane, the monsoon, the power grid. Now let's move to our final segment, focusing on policy earthquakes, where established norms were challenged, and the surprising new frontiers of discovery.
Let's do it.
The largest domestic policy earthquake of this intense period was the stunning and really dramatic shift at the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, regarding vaccine standards. This all began with a highly charged internal memo.
The trigger was the revelation on November 29th of an internal memo from Dr. Vinay Prasad, who heads the FDA's key vaccine division.
And this memo contained an explosive assertion.
That's putting it mildly. It asserted that an internal agency review had identified no fewer than 10 child deaths that were likely, probably, or possibly caused by COVID-19 vaccination-related myocarditis between 2021 and 2024.
And this assertion, regardless of its final verification, it immediately triggered a sweeping and fundamental response from the very top of the U.S. health apparatus.
FDA Commissioner Marty Makary and Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., they jointly announced a major and fundamental overhaul of U.S. vaccine oversight and policy.
So what did these new policies include?
They're comprehensive and restrictive, a significant departure from previous long-standing regulatory norms. They include demands for dramatically tighter standards for the approval of any new vaccines,
Requiring much larger pre-licensure safety and efficacy trials than had previously been deemed sufficient.
Exactly. Furthermore, they announced an immediate reassessment of the common practice of simultaneous administration of multiple vaccines in children.
And the imposition of significantly stricter rules regarding the vaccination of pregnant women.
Right, acknowledging the heightened sensitivity around maternal fetal health risks.
And perhaps the most immediately impactful change to public health policy was Kennedy Jr.'s move to restrict access to the existing COVID-19 vaccines.
Access was limited solely to older adults and people with underlying high-risk conditions, pending the completion of a detailed new safety review mandated by the administration.
This is where the polarization really comes in, because the basis for this action, the Prasad memo, was highly contentious.
It was. The FDA has not released the detailed case data on those reported child deaths, and the new internal analyses have not yet undergone the mandatory external process of peer review.
And that lack of transparency just fueled intense criticism.
Former FDA officials and numerous pediatric infectious disease specialists warned that drawing strong causative conclusions from passive surveillance data systems, like VA-EARS,
The Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System.
is methodologically very shaky. VA-EARS collects all reported incidents, regardless of causality.
Meaning correlation is not causation.
Absolutely not. Critics labeled the administration's action irresponsible and politicized. They warned that such a sweeping, controversial move risked severely undermining public trust in all vaccination programs.
Potentially leading to surges in preventable childhood diseases.
Conversely, supporters of the tougher rules argued that if an internal review found even a plausible signal of previously undisclosed serious risks, even in a small number of cases, then regulators had an immediate ethical duty to reevaluate the risk-benefit calculation.
Particularly for children who are statistically at very low risk from COVID-19 itself.
Right, so the coming months were really set to define whether this represented a necessary, if disruptive, course correction or a lasting politicization of U.S. regulatory science.
And this domestic debate over trust and standards intersects powerfully with a far more critical and widespread threat: the global immunization crisis.
Measles. It's often seen as the global barometer of immunization health, and it's making a very disturbing return.
The WHO data from the sources was stark. while global measles deaths had dropped dramatically, an impressive 88% since the year 2000.
A devastating 95,000 people, mostly children under 5, still died from measles in 2024. The downward trend is stalling.
The core of the problem is a coverage gap.
It is. To achieve herd immunity and stop transmission, at least 95% of children in every community have to receive the measles vaccine. In 2024, over 30 million children remain severely underprotected globally.
With the first dose coverage rate hovering around 84%.
And that 11-point gap is where the virus finds its fuel.
And the geography of this crisis is concentrated.
Yes, 3/4 of those underprotected children live in the African and Eastern Mediterranean regions. And this is fueling large, persistent outbreaks across 59 to 60 countries.
And the WHO and UNICEF identified multiple barriers undermining global goals like the Immunization Agenda 2030.
These barriers include persistent funding gaps, rising internal conflict, and political instability that disrupts cold chains and delivery, population migration, and a growing tide of anti-vaccine misinformation.
Which, significantly, could be inadvertently exacerbated by controversial policy shifts in major Western nations like the U.S.
That's the fear. And UNICEF also issued a stark warning about other vulnerable populations being increasingly left behind.
Specifically, children and adolescents living with HIV.
This is a major concern. Shrinking international funding threatens to reverse decades of gains in access to early diagnosis and life-saving antiretroviral treatment, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa.
And the data shows that adolescents are now a growing and disproportionate share of AIDS-related deaths.
Often because they're missed by pediatric care systems, but not yet fully integrated into adult care systems, creating this devastating gap in the continuity of treatment.
Moving from global health policy to global economic policy, we saw another policy earthquake in the Gulf Cooperation Council, or GCC, states that same week.
This is truly monumental, Oman's tax precedent. For decades, the GCC states, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Oman, have relied on a social contract,
where citizens and residents receive extensive state services and enjoy extremely low or zero personal income tax.
all funded almost entirely by oil and gas revenues.
And personal income tax has been politically untouchable. It's seen as a direct challenge to that foundational contract of services for oil wealth.
And Oman broke ranks. They announced plans to introduce a personal income tax, making it the first GCC state to formally adopt the measure.
And how is it being rolled out?
Initially, the tax will only apply to higher-income residents, but the signal it sends is enormous. The goal is clear and linked to their diversification strategy, Vision 2040.
Reduce chronic budget deficits, fund essential social programs.
And deliberately reduce the nation's financial dependence on volatile fossil fuel revenues.
So the regional implication of a successful rollout in Oman is vast.
It could set a major precedent. It could spark intense, difficult debates across the entire Gulf about fiscal fairness, global competitiveness, and whether citizens and residents are entering a new era where they must pay more directly for the state services they receive.
Fundamentally rewriting that social contract.
That's exactly it. And alongside Oman's fiscal evolution, we saw another strategic economic move that week in the region, the UAE's strategic pledge.
The UAE pledged $1 billion for essential power infrastructure
in the government-controlled parts of war-torn Yemen. This investment is framed as a critical combination of humanitarian aid and strategic long-term investment.
The funds are earmarked for rebuilding and expanding power generation capacity, including crucial solar and gas-fired projects.
Right. And given the UAE's significant involvement and strategic interests in the region, this move highlights how major Gulf states are increasingly using massive economic tools, not just military or diplomatic ones,
to shape the post-war political trajectory of fragile neighbors and secure long-term influence.
and ensure stability in regions critical to their maritime security and trade routes.
Finally, let's end this deep dive on a moment of pure, unexpected scientific discovery looking beyond Earth. Lightning on Mars.
That's right. Amidst all the geopolitical, climatic, and technical chaos down here, a NASA rover operating on Mars delivered the first clear, unambiguous evidence of lightning in the Martian atmosphere.
How is this detected? I mean, how do you see lightning on another planet?
Well, the rover's instruments detected brief, distinctive electromagnetic signatures and optical flashes that were entirely consistent with electrical discharges. In other words, lightning.
Wow. And what do the scientists believe is causing it?
They believe this lightning is likely associated with the intense dust storms that are common on Mars, or potentially with convective clouds that build up electrical charge, similar to thunderheads on Earth.
This is hugely significant. It fundamentally offers a new vital window into Martian weather and climate dynamics.
It invites direct comparisons to dust storm lightning and volcanic lightning that we observe on Earth. It helps us understand planetary atmospheric electricity in general.
And it has immense practical significance for future human habitation.
Oh, absolutely. Understanding electrical activity is critical for protecting sensitive astronaut electronics, for designing robust communication systems that can withstand electromagnetic interference.
And assessing the potential hazards for human explorers who will one day live on the Martian surface.
It's a powerful, wonderful reminder that even after decades of exploration, Mars can still surprise us with Earth-like phenomena occurring under profoundly alien conditions.
And it opens up entirely new avenues for research into surface chemistry and atmospheric evolution.
Just a fantastic discovery.
What an absolutely intense period these sources captured. I mean, if there's one overriding theme that connects the unilateral declaration of closed Venezuelan airspace, the fragility of the A320 software, the tragic Stockton shooting, and the catastrophic scale of the Southeast Asia floods.
It's vulnerability.
It is the theme of vulnerability. Systemic vulnerability, climatic vulnerability, and political vulnerability were all laid bare in those few volatile days of late November 2025.
Absolutely. We saw technological vulnerability in that single bit flip that exposed digital aviation systems to cosmic rays. We saw political vulnerability in a democratically elected government being immediately overthrown in West Africa. And we saw policy vulnerability.
With both the FDA's unprecedented and controversial shift in vaccine standards.
And Oman's decision to challenge that long-held social and economic contract by introducing personal income tax. All of these events tested global systems to their absolute breaking point.
Well, we hope this deep dive provided you with the necessary context, synthesis, and depth to understand the interconnected dynamics of that intense news period, moving far beyond the simple headlines.
And thank you for providing us with this truly fascinating and challenging stack of sources.
It was a pleasure to go through them.
And as we wrap up this intense session, consider this final provocative thought that emerges directly from the source material. The documents show that vulnerability, whether it's Sri Lanka's inadequate drainage infrastructure, Iraq's targeted gas fields, or the U.S. struggling with peak holiday travel capacity, is the defining feature of modern governance.
Okay.
So, if a single random bit flip caused by space weather on an airliner can ground half the global A320 fleet, what unseen space weather vulnerabilities might be hiding within the critical digital infrastructure that powers our global markets, our communication systems, and our energy grids right here on Earth?
A much bigger system.
A much bigger, more complex, and more fragile system. How truly prepared are we for the next solar radiation event powerful enough to trigger systemic global digital failure? Something for you to ponder and explore.